Well, hello there and welcome. My name's Tim Bone and I'm a cognitive practitioner, and as well as that I'm also a mental health advocate. And what I've done this month is I've put a video together for the purpose of dispelling the myth that those people who are without any relationships in the world as a result of struggling with being able to form relationships with people, or those who are without relationships in the world because, okay, they can form relationships with people, however, unfortunately, they are forever breaking their relationships up because their relationships don't seem to last very long, are somehow socially inept, socially incompetent, or socially unskilled. Now, the reason why I put this video together today was because I'm fed up always reading articles on the internet that are written by mental health professionals where the authors are forever putting huge amounts of focus when defining social skills on one's ability to be able to form and maintain relationships. That is, healthy relationships. Where the definition of a healthy relationship is a relationship that is A, not compromising to health, that is physical or mental health, and B, as well as that, a relationship that is full of shared experiences, where after each one of these shared experiences, the two people in that relationship continue to remain on good terms with one another. Now, another thing I disagree with thoroughly when I read articles on the internet that are always on social skills is the claim made by psychologists that social skills are best being measured by how many relationships a person has, and also, as well as that, by how long these relationships have been going on for. That is, how long a person has been able to maintain these relationships for. Now, we live in a world of over 7 billion people, and the vast majority of us have what is called a social circle. And this social circle is made up of family, friends, acquaintances, work colleagues, and any other sort of group that you can think of that I haven't mentioned there that belongs in that social circle. And you'll be amazed how little social skills are involved in the creating of this social circle. Now, this social circle is a social circle that is made up of a certain number of people. And when you look at the population of the world, which is 7 billion people, the number of people that make up our social circle is just a drop in the ocean of the number of people that there are out there for you and for me to be in relationships with. It is the case that as we progress through this life, we will only ever know a very small number of people, and we will only ever know, and we will only ever converse and get into conversations with and have shared experiences with and get to know a very small number of people. In fact, you could describe it as being a negligible number of people. There will be people that will come and go from that social circle throughout our life, but the turnover rate will not be high enough for us to truly be able to say we met a huge number of people. Now, as we will only communicate with people in that small social circle, we put a real limit on the number of people that we will get into conversations with throughout our lifetime. And as a result of that, we put a real limit on the amount of knowledge that we will learn from others. And this is probably one of the reasons why so many people will develop into ignorant beings and will remain ignorant beings. Because every conversation they have will be with the same people, it will be on the same subjects, it will be reflecting on the same shared experiences, and the anticipating of future repeated experiences. And therefore this social circle, you could argue, creates comfort zones which stop and prevent the growing of new knowledge and new experiences. And therefore, You could argue that our social circles can stagnate us. And I would say this happens just a bit too often. And it's one of the reasons why we're such a judgmental society, because we rely on things like stereotypes to educate us and navigate us, to give us an understanding of certain types of people, since we will never ever meet these types of people as a result of limiting ourselves to our social network. Now, if we look at this social network surprisingly required very few social skills in the growing of. Now, let's have a look at family to start off with. Now, with family, all of our relationships have been unconditionally given to us by life. We came out the womb, and upon coming out of the womb, immediately we were given a mother, we were given a father, we were given probably an older brother or an older sister. That's if you were born into the ideal family, that is. And that these are relationships that you were just suddenly blessed with on birth, and that you didn't have to put any work into the developing of whatsoever. These relationships just appeared in your existence like a light switch goes on. They were just granted to you. If we have a look at things like, if we have a look at relationships like the ones you have with your work colleagues, they're very similar. You don't choose who your work colleagues are. What happens is you get a job, and you're given that job, and then you go to work on the first day of that job. And then you go to work on that first day, and you go into your office, and it's full of people you've never met in your life before. And immediately, before you've even introduced your name to these people, before you've even had a conversation with these people, before you've even spoken a single word to these people, you already are in a relationship with them. Again, you've not had to put any work into that formation of these relationships. If we have a look at acquaintances, acquaintances are relationships that we don't really put any work into. We don't use our social skills to develop. Acquaintances just so happen to be people who know the same people that we know, or they frequent the same places that we frequent. And as a result of that, we become familiar with the sighting of them, and they become familiar with the sighting of us. So if we see them in a different environment, or in a different setting to the one that we're used to seeing them in, we end up smiling at them and just saying hello to them as we're passing by. And you might get just a wee bit of a chin wag, but nothing more than that. And then, let's have a look at friendships. Well, friendships, surprisingly, are not really formed using social skills. Friendships are formed through the frequent crossing of paths with the same people in the same places over a long enough period of time, so that one becomes familiar with the people that they see around them, and thus feels confident enough with the people that they see around them to start to feel that they can open up to these people and start to form a bond with these people. And a bond then starts to form between these people, resulting in a friendship. And that's what tends to happen with friends. And that's how friendships are formed. And surprisingly, we don't really use social skills in the formation of these friendships. I'll give you an example. Somebody could be starting a job in a workplace. Could be a factory. Could be a large workplace. And what they find is that on their first day of the job, they walk past somebody in the corridor. And that person neither looks at them, and they neither look at that person. And then what happens with more frequent crossings of paths with that person? These two people, when they walk past one another, start to smile at one another and say good morning, as they now recognise one another because they've been crossing paths with one another frequently enough. over the last maybe couple of weeks. And then what happens is, with more frequent crossings of paths with time, whenever these people cross paths with one another in the corridor, they're now smiling at one another, they're now saying good morning to one another, and the newcomer is now being asked by the other whether or not they're enjoying their job, and how long have they been here for now, and how are they finding settling in. And then with more crossings of paths, they're now walking past one another in the corridors, and it's a smile to one another, good morning to one another, and asking one another how their weekend was. And then with more frequent crossings of paths, that question, with the short-lived answer, which was, how is your weekend going, is now a question that's being asked in the staff room. That's now generating a bit of a conversation between these two people. And then what happens is these two people come to realise that they both find one another interesting, they both would like to spend more time talking and chatting with one another, and they probably then end up having a coffee at work together, and before you know it, they're now becoming friends. And that is very much how friendships form. Where during these conversations, one person finds out that they share commonalities with the other, and as a result of this develops a bond. The shared interests, the shared views, the same shared beliefs, etc., that they have in common with one another. Friendship formation is not really an event. Friendship formation is a journey. And basically what happens with friendship formation is familiarity grows a bond between two people for them to become confident enough to open up to one another enough to get to know one another enough for that bond to develop into a friendship. And that's what happens there. Now I can hear what a lot of people say. Oh, but come on. Okay, familiarity plays a huge role in the formation of friendships. However, you've got to know social skills, though. You've got to know not to crush somebody's hand when you shake their hand. You've got to know not to go into somebody's room, put your feet up on their table and say, hello, I'm so-and-so. You've got to know to hold a door open for somebody and not slam it in their face. You've got to know not to laugh when everyone else is crying. You've got to know these things if these frequent crossings of paths are going to result in friendship formation. My answer to that is yes, but I wouldn't say that these are social skills. I would say if you don't know not to crush somebody's hand or put your feet up on somebody's table or slam the door in someone's face or laugh when everyone else is crying, I would have to say that you've probably got some sort of learning disability there, or you've probably got some sort of cognitive impairment, such as frontal lobe disinhibition, causing you to lose control over the things you say and do. I don't think that's social skills, knowing not to do these things. I think that's just called brain and mind being intact. And that's what I would say there. How many people you have in that social circle is very much dependent on the institutions who you have met, the people that you have met and formed relationships with through. You'll notice I said that friendship formation is formed through the frequent crossing of paths with the same people in the same places over a long enough period of time for familiarity and thus confidence to grow, thus causing people to open up and form relationships with one another. Well, these same places that are in that formula that I've just quoted to you there are places that we call institutions. And these institutions can be schools, they can be workplaces, they can be clubs, they can be societies, they can be any other sort of institution that you can think of that I haven't mentioned there. And very often, how many people we meet in our social network is determined by the size of the institutions that we have been members of. For example, if you start a job in a workplace that maybe has 10 office workers in it, you're not going to form nearly as many relationships with people that can lead on to friendships as somebody who works in a workplace which is a big factory that has as many as 200 people working there. Therefore, how big your social network is very much determined by the size of the institutions that you have been a member of. And therefore it is wrong to think that the number of healthy relationships a person has in their life is a measure of how good their social skills are. It's also wrong to think that how old these relationships are, how long they've been maintained for, is also a good measure of somebody's social skills. For one reason, if you have two like-minded people, share similar interests, same politics, same beliefs, etc., you're not going to have to use social skills to maintain that relationship. You're both like-minded. You're both alike one another. All you need to be is yourself, and all they need to be is their selves. And that's all you need to be. You're not using social skills there to maintain that relationship. If you get one person who has an interest in politics and they're left wing, and you get another person who's got the same interest in politics and is left wing, they will both naturally love one another because they are both left wingers. And they will both have a tolerance for one another, and they will both enjoy one another's company because they will both love talking about the same left wing politics with one another that they like to discuss with one another. And therefore, they're not really using social skills there. What they're using is their love for the left-wing politics to keep that relationship going. It's like you get people who share hobbies and interests, and you can get two people who play golf, for example, and one of them is absolutely, and basically what maintains their friendship and keeps their relationship going is their games of golf. In fact, you can have people, who don't even like the person that they're friends with, and would say to you, "Oh, Joe's a complete dipstick. However, I just hang out with Joe because Joe is a guy who's a member of that very expensive golf club up the road, and I've never been able to afford to play there. So by being friends with Joe, I get to play at that golf club as a guest by remaining friends with him. But as far as Joe is concerned, I think he's a complete dipstick. This goes to show you that you cannot determine how good somebody's social skills are simply by measuring how long they've been in relationships with people for. There are many abusive relationships out there that people are in where they're being used and don't realise that they're being used. And too many mental health professionals would say all of your relationships are relationships that have lasted a very long time. Obviously, you get people's validation and people think very highly of you because they've been hanging around with you for long periods of time. Therefore, you must have good social skills. Whereas the truth is that person is being used and abused by so many people for other people's personal gain and gratification. Very often, how many people who are in your social circle, and also how long these relationships have been going on for, how long these relationships have been maintained for, is more determined by what you do for a living, your power, your status, and your wealth, and also your looks, and got nothing to do with your social skills. And what kind of things knowing you gives other people access to than it is your social skills. Now, we live in a world of validation. And what I mean by this is everybody craves validation. And they crave it like they need it. They crave it like it's food and water and air. And if they don't have this validation, they're not going to survive another day. And they're absolutely craving validation. And I must say that mental health professionals are no more immune and no more exempt from the same insecurities that make others require validation. And therefore it shouldn't come as a surprise that so much of the defining of what social skills are through the eyes of a mental health professional based on how good someone is at forming and maintaining relationships. I would say that this is about the only element of social skills that you hear mental health professionals ever talking about in articles that are written for the layperson. And I'm afraid to say it as well, it is the only social skill that the layperson appears to be familiar with or to be in the knowledge of. And therefore we have a very limited definition of what social skills are in the public eye. And also in the eye of mental health professionals as well. And this is dangerous, this limited definition of social skills, because it makes mental health professionals and other people as well very judgmental about anybody who is a loner and doesn't have friends, simply because they struggle to make friends or because they struggle to keep friends intact. It also makes the public very judgmental about anybody who chooses to remain, who chooses to live an alone life. However, they are loners because there's only one type of person they seek to be in a relationship with, and that is a genuine, authentic person who is real and doesn't put on any faces, doesn't put on any costumes for the purpose of blending and for the purpose of pleasing others and for the purpose of being all things to all people. They are looking for somebody who is truly comfortable in their own skin and is truly genuine and whose behaviours are all in line with their values, their views and their opinions. And that is what they are looking for. And somebody whose views, values and opinions are honourable as well. And I'm afraid to say it, such a person is a very difficult person to find. Such a person to become friends with is actually a very difficult person to find. And there are people out there who have purposefully ruled out having a relationship with anything, with anyone other than an authentic person. And as a result of that, they have socially alienated themselves to the point now of living in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week isolation. And yes, they do fall out with people the whole time because they're forever coming across fake people and they hate fake people. And these people would always be accused by mental health professionals of having poor social skills, as they do not have a social circle or a single relationship in the world. Some of these people will even go as far as play the benefit system so that they don't have to have colleagues who are false people and choose to live lives instead claiming benefits and not working. Many of the people who have opted out of work now and have decided that they're going to play ill and claim a disability benefit are people who have decided that they no longer wish to work with humanity, with humans, because they find too many people in the workplace to be fake, false, and choose to have no more to do with the workplace, purely to get away from these people, because they do not want to be in any sort of relationship, whether that be a friendship or a work relationship, with somebody who is false. Now what I'm going to do with the rest of this video is I'm going to introduce you to many other social skills. Most people watching will have never really considered before to be social skills. They'll have never really thought of these things as being social skills. And you'll be amazed how wrong you are to not recognise these things as social skills. And as well as that, after this video, you'll be a much more open-minded person, where the next time you see a loner or you see somebody who has difficulty making friends, you will not think anymore that this is a person who lacks social skills. You'll come to realise that actually very often the person who's not got a single friend can actually in fact be the most socially skilled person in the room. That's right. You can be somebody who struggles with forming friendships, finds every friendship they get into disintegrates because of fallouts and things, and still be more socially skilled than the person who is universally loved by everybody, who has many relationships. You're probably squinting at that, which is why I say stay tuned and listen to all of these other social skills that people do not recognise enough as being social skills. So let's have a look at these social skills then. Well, the first social skill is an obvious one. Everybody would think of this one as being the first one, and that is the ability to form a conversation with somebody. Now, believe it or not, this is a social skill that you do not use amongst your friends. You don't. What happens with your friends is this. If you look at that social network that we talked about at the beginning of this video, it's not just your friends, it's your family, it's your colleagues, it's your acquaintances as well. And if we look at the members of that social network, what you will find is that the people in that social network are people who you have many shared experiences with. They are people who you share the same views and beliefs as, and values as. You share the same interests as, politics as. You might also share many of the same dreams and goals as well. And there will be many other things that you will share with one another. And it's these things that you share with one another that give you scripts that you can form conversations out of. If you think about it, if you're sitting beside a table of friends in a restaurant or in a pub, there's a table behind you full of friends, very often they're sitting there talking about that birthday that we're all at this time last year, and they're all laughing about it. Or they're talking about that holiday they were on 18 months ago and how great it was and where they're planning on going this year all together. Or they're probably talking about that game of rugby that they all went to go and see last week and how they think that the team could have played better. Or they might be talking about how they're going to be trained, when they're next going to go out and train together to go jogging together because they're all training for a marathon or something like that. Or they might just be sitting there, talking about a common interest that they all have. Very often they're talking about a large talk subject, like they might be talking about politics or something that fascinates them. They might be talking about science, something that fascinates them all. The point I'm making here is that all of these conversations that you hear are coming from something that these people share with one another. That is, these people who belong to the same social network as one another. And therefore you could argue that the conversations that they have kind of have scripts that they can make reference to and that they can rely on in the generating of conversation with their members of their social network, and the maintaining and the keeping going of that conversation with whoever it is they're speaking to in their social network. Now, the ability to generate a conversation, that is a social skill that is best tested by putting somebody in a room full of strangers, nobody they know, where they go into that room on their own. Let's say there's 50 strangers in that room, and they're put in that room on their own amongst these 50 strangers, where they're not allowed to take a friend in with them, or anyone that they know in with them at all. And they're told that they're to spend a few hours there, and they're to get to know as many people as they can, but at the same time learn as much information from the people that they get speaking to. Where they're told to get learning as much information as they possibly can from the people who are in that room. They're told to learn as much as they possibly can from these other people's life experiences, these other people's life encounters, these other people's life knowledge and skills, and try and get talking to a good number of people as well over the few hours that they're in that room, and come out of that room and share with their friends in a few hours' time all the things that they had learned from being in that room. And that would be a true tester of somebody's ability to generate a conversation. When you generate a conversation with somebody, you know nothing about this person. You don't share any views, beliefs, values, opinions, shared experiences, anything. Shared aims, shared goals, anything that you know of when you meet a new person and you start generating a conversation with them. You know absolutely nothing about them. The two of you are just like blank canvases. You don't know anything about their politics, anything about their interests, anything about their work, their views, etc. You don't know if any of these things share commonalities with your views, your values, your opinions, your politics, your interests, etc. And therefore you truly have to get to know these people from scratch. And therefore to generate a conversation requires you to draw on all your life experiences, where you draw on all your life knowledge, and use your imagination and creativity to generate a conversation that will allow for you to bring up your life knowledge and your life experiences, to get the person that you're speaking to start sharing with you their life knowledge and life experiences. And then what you need to do is you need to then find commonalities between their life knowledge and experiences and yours, and start to now generate conversation and start to now focus on these common areas and use these common areas to keep a conversation going for a long time, such as an hour and a half, who knows. What you don't want is the conversation to die within 2 minutes. And that is a true tester of someone's ability to generate a conversation. And this is what you need to be able to do if you go into a bar on your own and you stand at the bar and you want to get talking to somebody and have a good conversation with somebody who you've just met for the first time in your life. This is what you want to be able to be good at doing if you're going to go to a party on your own where you're not going to know anybody, or join a club or a society and go down there on your first night on your own where you're not going to know anybody. It's a real skill, this. And it's a skill, unfortunately, very few people have. It's true. Very few people excel at this social skill of generating and keeping a conversation going. The people who excel at it tend to be people who, when they were young, lived in many different places. And as a result of that, they never became friends. They were never friends with just one social circle of people. And as a result of that, all of their childhood friends are friendships that disappeared years ago, because they never stayed put in any one place for a long enough period of time to make lifelong friendships out of these friends. And they find themselves in adulthood with no friends because of that, because it's very difficult to find friends in later life when you're trying to start out again in replenishing your friends' numbers, because you no longer have any friendships from your childhood days or your adolescent days or young adulthood days, because you've moved on to too many geographical places to have stayed in touch with these people. And like I said, it's very difficult to make new friends in adulthood. And if as a result of that, these people tend to live anonymous lives. And because they have very anonymous lives, they have a very high sense of self. And this very high sense of self gives them a huge amount of confidence. Not only that, but because they live an anonymous life, they also aren't scared of other people's judgment of them. And therefore, for this reason, they are capable of forming conversation with just about anyone, anytime, any place, anywhere. There's the other type of person who's good at this social skill, and that is the person who during their childhood was friends with more than one circle of friends. They had a circle of friends at school. They also had a circle of friends in their street. They also had a circle of friends probably at a club or a society that they were a member of. And they would sometimes they would merge these circles of friends, and sometimes they would keep these circle of friends separate from one another. And as well as belonging to more than one circle of friends, they've also had friends who have belonged to more than one circle of friends. So they've met their friends' friends and met a lot of friends' friends. And as a consequence of this, meeting people for the first time and speaking to people for the first time is not a new entity to these people. It's something that they grew up doing. And also, very often these people as well, when they were young, also had friends with people who are of different age groups. And as well as being friends with people of different age groups, they also did things like maybe go to the church on a Sunday, where after the church service they would hang around at the coffee session and speak to people who they had never met before, or speak to people that they didn't know but were like 30, 40 years older than them. These are the kinds of people who can do what I've just described, and that is create and keep a conversation going with anyone, anytime, any place, anywhere. And this social skill, unfortunately, is not a common social skill. You do get people who are instinctively good at it as well. You get people who have just been born confident socialisers and can talk to anyone, anytime, any place, anywhere. And they unfortunately get into a lot of trouble, because what happens with these people is they join a new club, they join a new society, and they seem to be way ahead of everyone else in the friendship formation process, because they are much more confident with the people that they have just met than the people they have just met are confident with them. And this creates an asymmetry, and this can get in the way of forming friendships and relationships and cause people to behave in aversive ways towards these people. And therefore, this is where having this skill can be a bit of a disadvantage, because it can make people that you've just met feel very out of their depth. And as a result of that, people tend to avoid you. And this is a good example of a social skill that one can A, excel at, and B, because they excel at, they actually find it difficult forming friendships. Sometimes impossible forming friendships, because they excel at this social skill. Now, another social skill that people don't really think about as being a social skill is the ability to put in a complaint. When you complain to somebody, you need to be able to be assertive. You need to be authoritative. You need to be confident and exude confidence. This is when you complain in person, that is. And you need to know exactly what kind of things the person you're complaining to might say, so that you can have prepared for that something to say back to them. It will stop them wiggling out of apologising to you or giving to you what they owe you. You need to know exactly what tone of voice to speak with. You need to know exactly what volume to speak at. And you also need to know the difference between being firm and being aggressive. And that you must pick firm and not aggressive. Firm is where you display anger, but you're displaying anger without coming out of your personal space and without threatening to come out of your personal space. Complaining is a social skill that you would really ever think about as being a social skill. Ever. They would just think putting in a complaint, and that's all they would think. But some people are very skilled at putting in a complaint and getting a reaction that they want, getting the reaction that they're after. And others will try putting in a complaint and just get walked all over. And therefore it is a social skill. Another social skill that people don't think about as being a social skill is the ability to debate. And with debating, it has quite a lot in common with complaining. With debating, what you've got is you've got an argument. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the other side see your argument and convince them into believing their argument to be wrong and your argument to be right, and then to have to concede to your argument being right and their argument being wrong. And believe you me, in a world full of ego, it's one thing convincing somebody that their argument is wrong. It's another thing getting them to admit that their argument is wrong. And that's where, now with debating, you need to know how to cunningly put your argument together so that there are no ambiguities in your argument that the other side can take advantage of to discredit your argument. Unlike complaining, where everything is factual, in other words, you broke a code of conduct, this is where you broke it, and therefore this is what should happen to you, therefore this is what I expect in return after me putting my complaint in. Everything there is factual with a complaint, but unlike a complaint, a debate is not factual. When you've got two sides debating, very often nobody is right and nobody is wrong. It very much depends on how you prioritise things, which argument you take, which argument you side with. And therefore, if you're going to take the side of A and argue A, and someone else is taking the side of B and arguing B, when you debate, you have to be good at preparing your argument so that none of the weaknesses in your argument are weaknesses that the person arguing argument B can take advantage of. And you also have to make sure the person arguing argument B doesn't put words in your mouth and doesn't make you say things that you didn't mean to say. And you've also got to have an extra vigilant ear for hearing contradictions being made by the person arguing argument B. And you've got to also be able to prevent the person who's arguing argument B at putting holes in your argument A by making up or coming up with non-factual information, made up information, unevidenced information. You've also got to be good at making sure that, a bit like making a complaint, that the other side can't pull your strings and press your buttons and get you angry and get you irate and get you hot-headed. And you've got to be good at coming up with things like analogies and scenarios to reinforce the point that you are making, to reinforce the argument that you are making, that says your argument A is the right one and their argument B is the wrong one. It is the analogies and the scenarios, I have always found when you're debating, that eventually win the debate and force your opponent into a tight corner where they've got no other option but to concede that their argument is flawed. And you've got to become so good at being able to put scenarios together and analogies together to do that. And what you've got to be careful of is that they don't invent analogies and scenarios that they can use against you that work, but only work because they've said something earlier on that's not true, that you didn't pull them up for. Another example of a social skill is the ability to educate. This is a social skill that I have found few people are good at. The ability to explain something complex to someone is a social skill that I would say I've come across too many people who do not excel at. I don't know what your experience of education has been like, but it's certainly been my experience that I have come across more bad teachers than I've come across good teachers. I've always found self-directed learning to be a far superior way in teaching and learning than mentor-directed learning is, or teacher-directed learning is. I can always remember being at school, I can always remember being at university and coming out of lectures and thinking to myself, goodness, I didn't understand that. Especially at chemistry lectures. I would think to myself, I'm absolutely lost. My brain is fried. I don't know what the hell any of that was about. I just kind of sat there and just got increasingly lost the more I heard my lecturer talk about this subject. However, I found that when I got to the library and found a good book, I found I was able to put it right and put it all together myself and make it all make sense myself. I didn't have the internet when I was a student, so I didn't have the benefit of looking up stuff on the internet today. And I've also noticed over the last 30 years how coursework has gone from being final end-of-year exam assessed to continuous assessment assessed. And I believe one of the reasons for doing this was because with the final end-of-year exam assessment, there's no weeding out the bad teaching until it's too late for the student. Because the bad teacher's teaching only becomes evident when the student has failed. However, with continuous assessment, you can weed out the bad teaching before the student fails. Because evidence of poor teaching by the teacher and understanding of what the teacher teaches by the student is evidenced long before the end of the curriculum. In other words, long before it's too late for the student. What I've noticed is that teachers can only teach and only cope with teaching the ideal student. That is, they can only teach the student who has no learning difficulties, no learning disability or mental health problem, no physical health conditions that can get in the way of the learning process, comes from a home that doesn't have a compromising effect on the child's or the student's learning at school or at college. That's the type of person that most teachers can only cope with teaching. The person who's free of all ailments and psychosocial complications and social disadvantages that can hinder one's learning. Therefore, if a teacher gets a student who has a learning difficulty like dyslexia, or a learning disability like high-functioning autism, or a student who has a depressive or anxiety disorder, if a teacher gets a student like that, the strong odds are their teaching skills will not be able to cater for the needs of that child or that student. And as a result of that, that child or student will be damaged. And too often, they are left with a lifelong anxiety disorder, such as social anxiety disorder, simply because their teachers could only teach the ideal student, which they were not, and the system is only interested in the ideal student. If you look at some of the teacher training courses that many teacher training students undergo, there's not a single lecture on a disability, there's not a single lecture on a mental health problem either. The content of these teacher training courses is ridiculous. I once did a postgraduate certificate in education, and I decided to quit it because it was rubbish what you were learning. Absolute garbage. Did it at Loughborough University back in 2001. I just thought this is absolute garbage, so I gave it up. Dumped it. Put it in the bin where it belonged. Another social skill is the ability to market something. And when I say market something, I don't mean market something over the internet. I mean market something to someone face to face, speaking to them, looking them in the eye, convincing them that this is something that they want to buy, convincing them that this is something that they need, convincing them that this is something they will not regret buying, and they'll be glad that they bought. This is a social skill. And again, it's a social skill that many don't have. And that's the ability to convince somebody into making a purchase. And to also tempt somebody into making a purchase as well. Now, this is a social skill that many people are not going to like to hear being called a social skill. But I'm afraid to say it is a social skill. And that is the ability to go out to a bar or to a nightclub or to a party and meet a member of the opposite sex for the first time in your life and be able to have what's called a one-night stand with them, where the two of you end up in bed with one another. This, I'm afraid to say it, is a social skill. And it's a social skill that only a very few people excel at, okay? And the majority of people sit there and say, these people that sleep around, they are so immoral. They are such bad people. They're scum. Scum of the earth, these people. Absolute scum. They are so dishonourable. They're so immoral. They're so disrespectful. They're such scum. I hope they slip and break their neck. Honestly, they're such terrible people. Somebody like me, I'm a moral person. I choose to be in a relationship and be loyal to the person I'm in a relationship with. Can I tell you something? That argument is not a genuine argument in the majority of cases. That argument, in the majority of cases, is somebody being bitter because they're jealous that someone else has the social skill to get other people into bed and they don't. Okay? That is the truth. Alright? I can tell you now that if a sex merchandise shop invented a wand where you could just wave that wand at anyone and that person would want to sleep with you, I can tell you now that wand would sell out instantly. Okay? And I can tell you there's not a single person probably on this planet who, if you bought them that wand for their Christmas, would snap it and say, no, I don't want it. Send it back. Okay? They would all quietly just sneak it into the inside pocket of their jacket and go, thank you. Okay? So, this is a skill that most people don't have, but would like to have. And it is. You've got to admit it. It is. There's a lot of people who get married because they don't believe themselves to have this skill. And they purposefully just choose to get married for the purpose of having somebody who can play that role in their life, and that role is to have sex with them. And that is the reason they get married. And what happens is after they're married, they become a more confident person. Something in their life happens where they become more confident. Maybe they get promotion at work. Maybe they move on to a better job. Maybe they move away to another city where they get to start again with them and their wife. And what happens is they grow in confidence. And they start to realise that the ability to get a person into bed is a skill that they did have, but they just didn't believe they had because of low self-belief. And now that they've discovered that they do have this skill, they now end up cheating on their wives or their husbands. Another social skill is the ability to lie and be deceiving. This is a social skill that requires one to score high on creativity, as well as that, be able to also score high on emotional intelligence, which one needs to be in order to know whether or not their lie will be believable or non-believable. And it also requires on a person being able to be convincing. This social skill is an art that requires one to be able to join up dots that do not exist. It requires one to invent dots and join these dots up in a way that is free of ambiguities, thus keeping the lie convincing and believable, and at the same time impossible for anyone else to reveal as being a lie at the same time. People who are good at this social skill make great criminals and forever running circles around the police and the authorities and getting away with the things that they do. It is effectively a vocational skill that fortunately most people are not that blessed at. Another social skill is the social skill of being able to see, that involves being able to see boundaries. Now, this social skill plays a huge role in us being able to get validation from others and being able to fit in with the rest and not be accused of being an antisocial member of society. This is a social skill that many people with autism struggle with, because autistic people struggle to see boundaries that other people don't fail to see, and therefore they cross these boundaries without realising they're crossing these boundaries, which makes them very unpopular with others and causes others to fall out with them. Now, I have to be absolutely honest with you and say that when you look at mainstream society, when you look at the bulk of the population aren't that great at this skill. Because do you know how often I have to tell people that you can't say this, and you can't say that, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you should have been more like this, and you should have been more like that. Do you know how often I hear myself having to tell people like this? And it's the frequency at which I hear myself and find myself telling people this that tells me that people are not great at being able to see boundaries. And that is the majority of the population, the mainstream. It is not something that they excel at. A good example of this is you're walking across a road and you hear a horn blare and you jump and you think, Christ almighty. And you look to your right and you see a guy in his car waving his hand out the window at one of his friends who's walking down the other side of the road, along the pavement, and you're thinking to yourself, bloody hell, don't toot your horn to say hello to your friend. You know what I mean? You know, Christ, you scared the living daylight out of me there. You know, it's like people just don't think, and they cross boundaries the whole time. They really do. Terrible. There's thousands of examples of people crossing boundaries the whole time that you have to tell them not to cross, which are boundaries that would be blatantly obvious to the high-functioning member of our society not to cross, but to the majority of society are not obvious. And this is why people who are high-functioning are the ones who have the nervous breakdowns. They're the ones who find people crossing their boundaries and them constantly falling out with others because others cross their boundaries. And because they have fallouts with others, because others are always crossing their boundaries, because others don't see their boundaries, because they're not high-functioning enough to see them, they always get accused of having relationship difficulties, and they always get accused of having problems with their social skills, and because they're seen to not be able to get on with people, and they're also being accused of having conditions like personality disorder as well. You'll remember from my functionality continuum video that the definition of a high-functioning person is somebody who has high IQ and high ability to apply intellect to practice. And unfortunately, we live in a world of people where the vast majority are low to high IQ, but probably low to moderate ability to apply intellect to practice. And therefore it's the very sane that get driven insane by the insane, you could say. Another skill that is overlooked is the ability to write a good letter. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was at school, when I was in primary 6, when I was only aged 10, we were all being taught how to write a letter. And I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, asking the Prime Minister what her favourite book was. Okay? And believe it or not, I got a reply. And I thought, well, that's not good preparation for adulthood, is it? Maybe have you seen my politician video? Well, now you'll know why I've got a bit of a cynical grin on my face there, yeah? Anyhow, I was never, I got a reply. However, when we were being taught how to write a letter, we were always told that we should keep our letters short. It was always stigmatised from a very, very, very young age. Okay, from a young age, that anything long was long-winded. Anything long was written by somebody who liked the sound of their own voice. Anything that was long was written by somebody who was boring. Any letter that was long was full of waffle. Any written letter that was long was not going to get read and would be binned, because it would be thought of as being written by somebody who was boring, long-winded, and loved the sound of their own voice. And that's what we were always taught. That was the message that was reinforced. And the reason, by the way, that message was reinforced, I believe, is simply because the shorter you keep a letter, the more you leave out of that letter. And the more you leave out of that letter, the less people have to investigate and address whenever you write a letter to them that's a letter of complaint or a letter over some other sort of matter you are dissatisfied with. The number of people out there who will write a letter and think to themselves, I won't put this in it, even though this is very important. I will talk about this at the meeting. And what I will do is I'll just ask for the meeting in the letter, and I'll talk about this at the meeting. Because if I talk about this in the letter, my letter will be too long. But it's because they miss out that bit that they weren't prepared to put in the letter and only speak about at the meeting that they didn't get their meeting. Okay? So it's always been a strategy, I think, of the authorities to silence us and shut us up and limit the amount of information that we will share with them whenever we have a complaint or whenever we are dissatisfied with something, thus minimising any action expected from them. Now, a letter, like I said, writing a letter is a social skill. And with a letter, what you need to know is you need to know what to write in that letter. You need to know what information to include, what information is relevant. You need to know exactly what things to say and what tone your letter should be written in. You should know the ideal length of that letter as well, where the definition of the ideal length isn't what the other person receiving your letter is going to like having to read or not having to read, but instead the ideal length is the length that gets everything said that needs to be said without saying more than what needs to be said. And that is the ideal length. If it's a letter of complaint, or if it's a letter forcing somebody into taking some sort of action or some sort of description, you've got to know exactly what to put in your letter that will make the person reading that letter feel that they've got no option but to give you what you're after. That is to, let's say, reimburse you or do for you what you're telling them they ought to be doing for you. Knowing exactly what kind of things to add to your letter, to put into your letter, that will put whoever's reading your letter into a tight corner where they have no option but to deliver for you and give you what it is you're after, so that your letter can fulfill its purpose. Another social skill that people don't really consider to be a social skill is the ability to negotiate. Negotiating is a social skill. This is a world that we live in that's incredibly selfish, where people only really tend to do things for their own selfish gains. And when you're negotiating with somebody, you're very often trying to meet halfway with someone and trying to get somebody to give you something that will involve maybe them compromising something so that you'll give them something. It's quite a skill when you think that this person you're negotiating with has no interest in you, couldn't care about you, and only cares about themselves and is only in it for themselves. And therefore the act of negotiating is a social skill that one would never really consider to be a social skill. Another social skill is the ability to diffuse somebody who's exhibiting challenging behaviour. Would you be able to diffuse a person who is starting to become aggressive and was becoming increasingly aggressive? And you could tell that emotion in them that angry emotion in them was getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and was starting to get towards a threshold where they were just millimetres away from going through that threshold, which if they were to do, they would throw a fit of rage and start getting violent and throwing things around the place. Would you be able to diffuse that person? Would you know what to say? Would you know what volume of voice to speak with, what body language to put on, what tone of voice to put on, what kind of things to say to make that person calm down? You certainly don't say things like, shut your mouth or I'll get the security and throw you out of here. That doesn't work, let me tell you that, okay? Again, that's a social skill I would say too many people don't really excel at, is the ability to diffuse someone. They're very good at getting someone irate. They're very good at getting somebody wound up. But they're not very good at winding somebody back down again. Another social skill is the ability to act. That's right, act. I would actually say, this is something that too many people are good at. I think too many people are good at acting your friend when they're actually a backstabbing git. I think too many people are good at, saying yes, that they feel passionate about doing something for you and they really want to help you and they really want to be your right-hand man, when they're just being a people pleaser, putting on an act of being a proactive person who's going to take action. Yes, I'm afraid to say it, acting is a skill I'd probably say too many people are too good at. That's a shame. But you would expect that when we live in a world where there's maybe too many there's an awful lot of false people around. You could expect acting to be a skill that there would be an awful lot of hanging around as well. Okay? So, there you have it. Acting. Another social skill is the ability to manipulate. That's right, manipulate. The ability to manipulate somebody is the ability to play with their emotions and encourage other people's emotions to bring on behaviours and decisions that suit your agenda. People who can manipulate can also enthuse, they can also motivate. There's negative manipulation, which is the kind of manipulation I've just described to you there as being the one where you take advantage of people's emotions and thus to bring on behaviours and decisions made by others to suit your own agenda. And then there's positive manipulation, you could say, where you enthuse people, you motivate people, you make people believe in themselves. And this is a social skill. It's a social skill that you want every leader to have. If you don't have this social skill, then you're not going to make a great leader. Because your pack is always going to need enthused, it's always going to need motivated, it's always going to need reassured, it's always going to need its self-belief maintained and built and grown. Therefore, you have to be somebody who can manipulate, both in if you're going to be either a good leader or a bad leader. Okay, when I say bad leader, I mean an immoral bad leader, not a bad leader as in a poorly skilled bad leader. And this is a social skill that, again, never really gets thought about as being a social skill. And you're either very good at it or you're absolute terrible at it. It's either one of the two. And another social skill to finish off is being funny. The act of being comical. And this is a social skill that many people don't have, and it's a real blessing to be blessed with it. It requires you to be able to see irony between two unrelated paths that cross with one another. If you're skilled at this task, then that is one of the best social skills you could ever be blessed with. And being funny is evidence of high IQ. People who are funny are high IQ people. So before this video, you would have had this image of the guy on his own, with no friends, struggles to make friends, gets into friendships, but the friendships never last any more than a few weeks before there's a fallout or a breakup of some sort of description. You would have seen that person walking around on their own on a Saturday night because of these reasons, and not having spoken to anyone all week, as being socially inept, socially inadequate, socially unskilled. However, I think you'd have to agree, having gone over that list of social skills with you, there are many social skills that such a person I have just described could excel at, despite not having any friends and not having any healthy relationships in their life, and being alienated from the rest of the world to the point of living in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week isolation. You cannot tell how socially skilled somebody is by the number of healthy relationships they have in their life, and as well as that, how long the relationships that they have in their life have been going on for, and how well they are at maintaining these relationships. Now I'm going to finish off by introducing you to this guy, and his name is James. James is not a very nice person, by the way. No, he's not. He's a bad lad, James. Very bad. He's a womanizer, he's deceitful, he's dishonest, and he gets away with it every time he chooses to be deceitful and dishonest. He also can manipulate others, and therefore he takes advantage of so many people and makes great gains from taking such advantage of other people. He's a manipulator who can influence people into doing anything he wants them to do for him, for his own personal gain, even though it very often results in these other people experiencing loss. He wins every argument he gets into, and everybody thinks he's a real smart arse because he wins every argument. This guy can sell anything to anyone. The number of people who have bought things from James for a great price and have 10 days later found that thing to be broken because of his taking advantage of people and his being able to sell anything to anyone. He's left many people financially broken, while he has got richer and richer. And guess what? This won't surprise you. He's a man that everybody hates and everybody loathes, and nobody ever invites to a party, or ever goes out with for a meal, or ever has anything to do with. His own family even say, keep away from James. He's a low-life creep. And that's James for you. You've then got Adam. And Adam is none of these things. Absolutely none of them whatsoever. Adam is just a lovely guy. Adam is just brilliant. Everybody thinks Adam is fantastic. Adam is great. Everybody's going, is there a party? Will Adam be there? Everybody wants Adam to be there because everybody thinks Adam's lovely. And Adam is universally loved by everybody and has loads of friends. Okay? Alright? But he's none of the things that James is at all. Okay? So, I ask you this question. Which one of these two people do you think is the most socially skilled? Precisely. Doesn't that just go to show you you cannot judge a person's social skills by how many healthy relationships they have and how long they've been in these healthy relationships for, and how good they are at maintaining healthy relationships? Doesn't this example here at the end just make a farce of any mental health professional who says he's without relationships in his life, and any relationships he has had have always come to devastating endings, therefore he lacks social skills, and therefore is a socially unskilled person? Doesn't that just make a farce of that claim? So, I hope you found this video educational. I hope you found it awakening, and I hope you found it entertaining, and I hope you feel you might be a smarter, wiser person for having watched it. And I do look forward to making my next video now for the month ahead. And until then, goodbye and take care. Bye.